Hello, everyone. Hope, first of all, I hope everybody can hear me okay. I want to first welcome everyone. My name is Dwayne Hopkins. I'm the manager of the Digital Oil and Gas Initiative. I'll be your host today for the webinar, AI in Oil and Gas, a Tech Company's Perspective. Co-sponsored by TechNL and NOIA, this webinar will help build awareness, educate, and increase overall knowledge of the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning within the oil and gas industry. Prior to introducing our speakers on this AI webinar, I would like to first acknowledge the land of which TechNL resides. We respectfully acknowledge the land of which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has now been ever erased. We also acknowledge the island of Uktuk-Manduk, which is Newfoundland, has the unceded traditional territory of Beothuk and enaimco. As we acknowledge Labrador has the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu, the Natsunun, and the Inuit of the Natsavut, and the Inuit of Nunatukadut, of which I call home. We acknowledge all First Persons who have come here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. For those residing outside of Newfoundland and Labrador and taking this webinar, I open you to respectfully acknowledge the land of which reside within the chat box. Now, some housekeeping items. As per a normal webinar format, attendees' audio and video is disabled for the presentation. If you have any questions or discussions points during the presentation, please include them within the Q&A or chat function respectively. I will note them and ask them to our presenters on your behalf at the end of the presentation. I also note that this session is also being recorded and will be available within a few days from the TechNL website. Now, I'm going to hand it over to our co-host for today, Beverly Bishop from NOIA, to say a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Dwayne. I'm Beverly Bishop, and I'm the Operations Manager at NOIA. NOIA is very excited to be part of the Digital Oil and Gas Initiative and to offer this series of webinars with TechNL to bring together both energy and tech professionals interested in learning more about AI in the oil and gas industry. I look forward to hearing from Steve Follet and Ron Parrott of enaimco today as they share how predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning will be critical to the reduction of emissions, operating costs, and risk in the offshore oil and gas industry. Steve Follet is a native of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and he has a mechanical engineering degree from Memorial University. He has extensive subsea engineering and large project delivery experience globally, supporting the energy sector while executing major oil and gas and renewables projects in Canada, Australia, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Throughout his career, Steve has held numerous project management and executive roles while working for numerous organizations, including Technique, Subsea 7, ACERG, Husky, Nalcor, ExxonMobil, and NTL. Currently, Steve Follet is the Chief Operating Officer at enaimco, headquartered in St. John's, with a passion for developing digital solutions to support energy companies and industry as they strive to achieve net zero. And we also have Ron Parrott, who developed an interest in technology at a young age, learning to program and build computers in junior high and high school. He completed an undergraduate degree in computer science in 2011 and subsequently completed an MBA in 2021, both from Memorial University of Newfoundland. His career started at Verafin, a technology company headquartered in St. John's, in 2009, and was part of the company as it transformed from about 60 people to over 600 when he left in 2020, just months before the announcement of its sale to NASDAQ for 3.6 billion Canadian. Throughout his time at Verafin, Ron spent the majority of it leading development teams primarily responsible for building interfaces and integrating with third-party systems. In 2020, Ron made the change by moving to another local tech company, ClearRisk, where he was brought on as VP of Product. In this role, he was responsible for helping the development team and company transition from a custom product to a standardized and scalable solution. He joined enaimco in 2022 as the Chief Technology Officer with the dream of truly making a difference as we strive to net zero. So I'll turn it over to Steve and Ron. Thanks so much.
Thanks for that, Bev and Dwayne. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
All good?
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks thanks for the introduction, and thank you to TechNL and Noya for coordinating the session today, and thanks for everybody for joining. I'm Steve Follet. I'm going to speak for a little while first before going back and forth with Ron, but I wanted to provide some initial framing commentary to give you some insight into our presentation today. First, I wanted to highlight that we're not only going to talk about AI, but rather about the digital journey to AI for the oil and gas industry. Secondly, I wanted to make you aware that our current focus at enaimco right now is related to leveraging digital solutions and software for marine and subsea applications in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Thus, the examples within the presentation will be primarily related to those applications, but I think they have broader applications to all aspects of oil. Our intention is not to take up the full hour, but to leave time at the end for questions. Any questions raised throughout, we can attempt to answer as well, and we'll let Dwayne and Bev manage that. So to kick things off, Ron, maybe you could host a quick poll so we can learn a little bit more about the people attending the session today. It's anonymous, so you should see a poll come up in front of you there. So if you wouldn't mind answering a couple of questions, just so we get a sense of who our audience is here. We'll just give you a moment to make your answers, and then we'll show the results. What industry are you in? And to what extent do you believe your organization is currently working towards environmental initiatives? We have another poll item a little bit later related to digital, but I want to get some insight from this poll first.
All right. Looks like the answers have slowed down, so I'll end it here now and see what we have.
Okay, so 50% oil and gas, 22% tech, 25%, or a little over 25% other and other energy. Okay. And to what extent do you believe the organization is currently working towards environmental initiatives? So yeah, as you can see, it's a bit of a mix. Great to see that 28% believe to a great extent. I think that's actually quite impressive. Somewhat implies to me that, you know, there's an effort being made there, which is great, which is good to see. And then, you know, minimal, obviously there's people that feel that their organization have a way to go. So that's great. That's useful. As we can see, there's quite a mix of different people from different backgrounds and companies, and believe that their respective companies are on different paths to environmental sustainability. Okay, well, if we move on to the next slide there. So I'll address how to pronounce enaimco first, as I know some people struggle with how to say it. It was actually originally an acronym associated with asset integrity management, but now the vision for the company has grown since then, and it's become much more than that, of which I'll explain herein. But it is enaimco for anyone wondering exactly how to pronounce it. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about our company and our company inception. So I'm one of the co-founders with Sam Allen, who is a co-founder as well. Sam is not in this session or not presenting here today, but he's a longtime Technip executive that some of you may know from the oil industry. He was president of Technip Canada, Technip Australia, and has extensive experience in Europe, and finished his Technip career in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And a couple of years back, Sam was consulting with Kraken, and we would connect and talk about the industry. And we had both worked extensively internationally, and both felt extremely strongly that NL has some of the most competent, talented people in the industry, and that with the transition going on in the industry, it would be a shame to not capture and ensure that incredible talent that's been built here over the last 30 years is not reallocated or deployed in a beneficial way for the province. And it was during that time, through those discussions, and with consideration for the Kraken subsea imagery technology specifically, that myself and Sam came to the conclusion that advancements in data acquisition and data quality, among other things, could be utilized to reduce not only risk and cost in the energy sector, but also emissions associated with offshore assets. And it was on that basis, that combination of reallocation of what is a wealth of experience and the need to apply data to improve the environment and the environmental situation that enaimco was born. So further to that, fundamentally, we and our team all believe in the importance of achieving net zero and supporting the energy transition, and suggest that digital solutions and software will be critical to achieve that, which includes AI and machine learning and predictive analytics, of course. You know, and further to that, we're a Canadian company, and we're merging what we believe to be this world-class local engineering industry competency with the growing tech and software competency, which is an incredible resource here in Newfoundland in its own right, to develop software that will help energy companies reduce their emissions and bring greater value to their organizations, frankly. So, in terms of the introduction, I think Bev did a pretty good job, but that's myself and Ron there. As Bev said, I'm a mechanical engineer, you know, from Newfoundland, primarily subsea background in oil and gas and renewables, and worked internationally with subsea installers and then operators globally. And most recently was with ExxonMobil and president of the Newfoundland Transshipping Limited Company here in St. John's before I came over to enaimco. As you heard, Ron, software developer background by trade, I suppose, and has had a career in the NL tech industry, including Verafin and most recently ClearRisk before joining enaimco as CEO or CTO, sorry. So, as Simon Sinek would suggest, we'll start with the question of why enaimco exists to give you some background. So, and to answer that question, this is our mission and why we exist. We apply intelligence to support a sustainable world. The intelligence, of course, as I've already gone on about, being the wealth of local industry, energy industry knowledge combined with the growing tech competency in the province. We believe that machine learning and AI will be critical contributors to this mission. Therefore, we believe that the path to digitalization, so not just the arrival or not just getting to AI and machine learning, but the actual path to digitalization of the oil and gas industry, to ensure we avail of technology and maximize the value of data, is as important to the reduction of emissions and supporting net zero as the end goal itself. And with this digitalization journey comes numerous other benefits than just the emission reduction as part of our mission, which includes improvements to safety, efficiency, risk, and cost reduction, as we all know. This digital journey is something Ron, Sam, and I personally believe in, and we know it can have a powerful impact on the environment, bring a great deal of value to the industry locally, and then we hope to bring that value globally, frankly. So, further on from our mission, what's our vision? To be recognized as a transformational provider of digital solution in the world's journey to net zero. So, thus, we want to be working with energy companies to help them digitalize and find net zero solutions. Our current project and business lines I'll talk about a little bit later, because I'll use some practical examples to convey our point. But first, I want to talk about the oil and gas industry in general. A global industry, extremely capital intensive, high returns, high environmental risk, high safety risk. The industry is comprised of many companies, numerous countries that are all at different stages of exploration, development, or operations with a wide range of processes, all of which are somewhere on the path to digitalization. Thus, we see this digitalization as an entire industry, frankly. And onto itself, and will require many different service providers and suppliers with a host of different products, all of which we believe in the next 5 to 10 years will be commonplace in the industry. But it feels like a long way to go from where we are today. That being said, with all the different digital solutions required to solve these problems, and with consideration for where the industry is today, we believe many of these solutions will require disruptive innovation. So I know disruptive innovation is a common term to some people, but for those that aren't familiar with the term, and to help better understand what disruptive innovation is, I wanted to provide some additional context as it's very important to the discussion. So one of the definitions is an innovation that creates a new market or enters at the bottom of an existing market by providing a different set of values, which is important, which ultimately and sometimes unexpectedly overtakes its incumbents. So the clear examples or some practical examples of disruptive innovation are Uber, Netflix, Skip the Dishes, all disruptive innovations. Effectively, you're changing the way a problem is solved entirely, rather than just providing a tool to improve how the problem is solved currently. So it really results in a complete change in behavior and how you approach a problem. It is much more difficult to get an entire industry to adopt something that is disruptive. Thus, we in industry will have to change our behavior to adopt these types of disruptive solutions in the digital world. But the real benefit of a disruptive innovation is that while it can be difficult to develop, adopt, and implement, the value can be exponentially greater than with a non-disruptive solution where you're just supplementing how you're already trying to solve a problem. So we believe that for industry to achieve its emissions targets and digitalize, including the use of AI and machine learning, as quickly and effectively as it is committing to, it will require a lot of disruptive innovation. And this will be a reoccurring theme as we move through the presentation. So just a quick snapshot in an effort to apply intelligence to support in the support of net zero. These are our current business lines for enaimco and the projects we're working on now. As I said, our current projects are subsea marine related, but all with a emission reducing focus. So first, there's the digital asset integrity management solution, or the subsea digital twin of an offshore subsea asset. And for clarity, as digital twin means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, we're building not just a 3D model, but also a software and service solution that includes the collection and storage of data, associated contextualization, analysis, predictive analytics, and ultimately AI and machine learning. I'll provide a little more specific context on this on an example later. Then we're also providing a digital system simulation offer, which includes simulation and analytics software services to industry to support the reduction of greenhouse gas, help efficiency, reduce risk, of course. We're currently working with NRC IRAP on a potential project in Newfoundland related to the marine and logistics applications that we believe this solution is transferable not only within oil and industry, but to other marine industries globally, which we can talk about, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But first, I'm going to hand over to Ron, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the digital journey and why we can't just turn on the AI machine.
Thank you, Steve. All right. Hey, folks. So a couple of weeks ago, some of you may have been around, you saw Jeff give a presentation about what AI and machine learning actually are. And really, he has a bunch of great content on YouTube and podcasts, so definitely feel free to check that out. But for the next few minutes, what we're going to talk about is essentially the journey of what needs to be done before we can get to the point where we actually use AI. And in most cases, using AI is not simply the matter of turning it on. And this might seem obvious to a lot of you, and it probably does, but it often gets lost in the excitement of AI changing the world, which it will, and it already has to a large extent. But there's a ton of work that needs to be done to get the AI ball rolling, and of course, then to use it effectively. For me personally, I'm gonna talk a lot about the data side of things. That's where my background is. But there are other things that need to be considered as well, like how do we leverage AI to get the business value out of it that we're looking for, and how do we change our processes to ensure these results are actually being leveraged. But first, we're going to do our last poll of the presentation to get a feel for how you folks feel about your use of data and digitization. So should see the poll there now. Basically, we're trying to understand to what extent you believe your organization is leveraging digital solutions to get the maximum benefit of this data that's out there. All right, the last few trickling in there now. Very good. Okay, so that was that's interesting. So as you can see, it's a bit all over the place. Some companies are using data, it seems like every day probably, to make decisions and drive behavior, and then others aren't quite taking advantage of data just yet. So that's really interesting. And what we're going to talk about here very shortly is this path, so that people can go from the bottom there, from not at all, to truly leveraging data in various ways. There we go. Trying to drive and speak at the same time. All right, so this wheel here. So we borrowed some information from a recent Deloitte article that went out about the digitization process within oil and gas. So this here gives a bit of an idea of all the tech speak that's being thrown at you in articles and publications, and videos, of course, as well. And often talks about it as if it's truly needed right away. So we need to jump into AI, we need to jump into blockchain and high performance computing and all that sort of thing. And this is kind of daunting. For me, I mean, I've spent most of my career in the tech space, and this is, I mean, I certainly don't understand or have a great amount of experience in each and every one of these things. So I can certainly appreciate that it's a challenge to try to disseminate exactly what is important here. And probably even more importantly, what can we do right now, and what can we use right now? I mean, ultimately, in the end, we have to decide where to focus our attention and resources to solve the problems, and how to prioritize this. So I'll discuss that a little bit later. And really, this is going to be a reoccurring theme. I mean, Steve has already spoken about it to some extent. In order to get to AI, we have to go through this digitalization path, this journey. When we have to start somewhere, and as you saw in the poll, a lot of us aren't even necessarily using data to its full extent. So where do we start? And then, I mean, if you want to consider a practical example of this sort of disruption that we believe AI is, I mean, just think a few years ago, probably quite a few years ago, feels like to me a few years ago, GPS was gaining popularity, and a lot of folks were not interested in leveraging this technology, and felt a lot more comfortable using maps and experience and compasses and that sort of thing to provide direction. But now it's essentially ubiquitous. So there was that disruption there. That was that change in behavior that people went through in order to truly leverage a technology. And then, you know, as I mentioned, we do believe this is the same thing that's going to happen with data and AI, and is currently happening with data and AI. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And another Deloitte entry into the presentation. So this is kind of a bit of a model that we feel can be followed in order to really get to the place where we're leveraging AI. So in tech, you're going to hear about a lot of journeys. You hear about the customer journey, the onboarding journey. Well, we believe this is the data journey, or the digitalization journey, or, I mean, as Deloitte calls it, the digital operations transformation model, the DOT model. And we just want to use this to highlight a potential approach and kind of talk high level about the various sections of this model. So the first one there, physical to digital, really is talking about identifying where do we get this data that we need, what sensors do we have, what sensors can we install, and obviously at the beginning we need to identify what data we want. And then once you get the data, how do you leverage sophisticated analytics, and sometimes not sophisticated analytics, to provide results that ultimately provide value? And then to take it from there, how does this get actioned? How do we transform this back into the physical world to have robots and virtualization that are doing things for us, and self-driven in a lot of cases? And something Steve is going to highlight it a bit later is that for every different area within the industry, these sorts of problems are at different stages, and we'll talk through kind of how to approach that depending on where you in your individual situation currently reside. And finally, certainly last but not least, this is all kind of centers on the concept of security, and really security needs to be considered throughout the entire model and embedded in each and every step along the way. So, as I mentioned, I'm certainly no expert on the topics that were displayed earlier, but data is something I'm reasonably comfortable with. So let's work through the data aspect of this whole AI journey that we're speaking about. All right, so the first thing really that one needs to consider, and I'm sure a lot of you already are considering, is what data do you need? What values are you trying to drive, and what are the sources of these? And in some cases, the sources aren't available, so you need to install them. But I would be willing to bet in a lot of cases, there's a lot of data being driven. I've heard random stats about 10% of the data is actually being used within the industry, and please don't quote me on that, but it's clearly there's a lot of data out there that can be leveraged that currently it isn't. And something that can also be considered, a lot of time we talk about using our business value or what types of value we're looking for to drive the sources of data, but I think there's also value in looking at it from a bottom-up approach, where you can see what sorts of data do you currently have already, and from that what value can be derived. So it's definitely worth going through a little bit of an inventory about what data sources currently exist and may not be being leveraged. The second step is getting into a little bit more of the process of managing this data. So, I mean, the data is being provided through sensors, through other applications, through from the environment. I'm sure there's any number of possibilities. So how do we get that data into a place that is a state that is usable, whether this is centralized or normalized? I mean, there's all sorts of, an ETL pipeline is something some of you are probably familiar with. Like how do we take this data so that we can actually start using it? And then finally, how do you use it? Something that's going to be a common theme as we work through this presentation is that even this step of the journey alone, it can provide a heck of a lot of value. You can show dashboards, automate alerting, improve your communication, more easily access information simply through this process of figuring out how to obtain and process your data. So we don't need to jump to AI right away. There's definitely value in getting to AI, but we don't need to jump that right away. It's important to work through this journey. And I think what we'll find is this is truly the minimal viable product that Steve mentioned here, is figuring out how to get and use data to begin with, because just doing that alone can bring a lot of value quite quickly. Okay, so we have the data. We figured out what data we can get and what data we want to get. Now, how do we automate and action that? And from here, we need to figure out what types of analytics would be the most useful. We want to think about that, and in some cases, we actually want to think about this before we get the data. But certainly, now that we have it, how can we build our analytical models to provide us with the results we need? What problems are we trying to solve? And something to consider here is just one example as we go through the stop process is, what types of analysis will require the most or the least amount of effort compared to what will provide the most impact. And likely what you'll find is there are a number of types of analysis, or a number of outputs or results that we can obtain through minimal effort initiatives or minimal effort software development possibly. Certainly then there are more that will require a little bit more effort, so we have to prioritize and plan those accordingly. But there's an entire spectrum of sophistication that's required, and along that entire spectrum, we can likely provide some sort of value. So I think these are things that really need to be considered. And certainly AI is definitely a piece of this. But I think what we're trying to highlight here is the journey itself is valuable, and we want to get on the journey. We want to start the journey. It's important to do that, and we can obtain value right away, and then we'll get to AI, which may end up being the most valuable of all. Probably will. Last but not least is the sharing of data, which is potentially an interesting topic and probably deserves several webinars in and of itself. But there's no doubt, and I'm pretty sure it's obvious to most of us, that there are tons of inefficiencies out there because of siloed data. And I believe what you'll find is that this is actually going to become an even greater challenge when we're trying to leverage big data, and AI, because the more data we have, the better results. So in the end, how do we figure out if it's safe to share the data, and how do we make it safe if it's not? So I'm just going to use an example from my past working in the financial sector. There's a regulation that went out in the US that essentially allowed the banking industry to provide information or share information amongst one another in an effort to detect money laundering and prevent, of course, in the long run, which is related to several other types of crime. And obviously, the privacy laws and whatnot are different in banking than oil and gas, but it's entirely possible to believe that, in theory, maybe regulations at some point would require the industry to share data within itself to better protect the environment. And certainly there's already several commitments that have been spoken about in Canada and the industry committing to certain environmental initiatives. So it's probably not a stretch to believe that there will be further requirements as time goes on. And again, there's already an understanding that there's a lot of value in sharing data from an efficiency standpoint. So maybe there's a real opportunity here to be proactive and figure out how to make it work without giving away, obviously, the intellectual property or competitive advantages that certain data affords. I mean, that's obviously a consideration. And I don't want to suggest that I have the answer, or Steve, or we have the answer just yet, but we do believe that the SaaS and cloud infrastructure that is certainly available today is a great place to start when it comes to this. And again, as Steve mentioned earlier, we definitely want to recognize that the industry itself is high capital, it's high risk when it comes to safety, especially, and it has a lot of revenue. And there are a lot of really large companies working in this, so we really want to consider how can we leverage the value of this data without compromising the confidentiality. And ultimately, in the end, the result should be the maximization of the value of the data for yourself, but also for of all the data as a whole. And then, as I mentioned, we get back to kind of this model here, the Deloitte model, and ultimately, what this highlights is it's really an ongoing process. It's a circle. You do it for a small aspect of your business, and then repeat the same process for a larger one or a different one, and eventually, it becomes ingrained without the entire organization. And yeah, that's about it. With that, we'll get back to Steve, and he'll talk a little bit more about his experience with some AI opportunities in the industry.
Thanks for that, Ron. Appreciate that. And I'll just continue to build on some of Ron's commentary and try to bring us back to the oil and gas and energy industry that we're in right now. So in terms of the industry and where we are from a digital perspective, and I want to provide some examples of how digital solutions can be applied. But first, I think it's important to recognize that for digitalization of the industry and ultimately the application of machine learning and AI to occur, we need to understand that the facilities and owners within the industry globally have different needs and are on sometimes completely different paths to digitalization. So as those from the oil industry know, the industry's needs vary quite wildly depending on asset age, condition, asset type, where the asset is geographically, who the owners and operators are, what the politics are in a specific area. And even in our own region here, if we look at our greenfield and brownfield opportunities, what a 20 or 15 or 20-year-old subsea asset that was designed in the 90s with certain limitations around access to data, like a White Rose or a Terra Nova will want, would be very different from what a low POB development with the intention to use autonomous underwater vehicles, AI, and machine learning, i.e. potentially Beta Nord, would want. So those are companies that are interlinked with each other on different assets and projects globally. But when you think about their digital requirements or even their ability to accept a digital solution, they're really completely different. So I think to that point, I think it's important to just discuss the importance of defining a minimum viable product in terms of what your digital solution is. So for many operators, the thought of applying an AI solution might seem like a quantum leap from the level of digitalization that currently exists for a given facility or even a given problem. Thus, it's better to focus on the importance to start the journey to digitalization and establishing an MVP. just planning the leap to AI or to machine learning may be a step too far for many problems and many operators. So in short, I think it's important that you ask yourself, or we ask ourselves in industry, what are the most critical or the easiest issues that a digital solution could solve the soonest? Back to Ron's piece around the action priority matrix, effort and impact aren't always correlated, and typically they're not. So what are the most critical issues, but also what are some of the easiest issues that you could potentially solve with existing data? I think it's important to ask both. This will ensure that the start of the journey gives a product that can provide benefit now or as soon as possible. As in, you're not looking at years of developing an AI product that you hope to bring benefit in 2 to 3 years. You start with an initial product now that avails of data and provides you benefit immediately or as soon as practical. Then additional functionality can be added and layered over time to continue to develop towards the use of machine learning or AI, depending on where you are with that particular digital solution. So if we just go to the next page. So I think it's important. I thought this was an interesting table. Where are we today in the oil and gas on the road to digitalization? So if you have a look at the above table, also taken from the Deloitte report, which is called the Digital Transformation in Upstream Oil and Gas, you can see the phases of oil development along the top. And then down the side, you can see the stages of digitalization, which are very similar to the stages defined in the digital operations transformation model that Ron presented a little earlier. So you can see the outlined circle is where the current digital standing in the industry, and you could see the solid circle is the suggested digital leap in the short to midterm in 2 to 3 years. So we can clearly see a trend here, or a few trends, whereby the early phases of oil and gas exploration and development are further along in the digital journey than the production and operations phases. And there's specific reasons for that as well, which I won't get into here. But while in general, all phases are in the early to mid stages of the effort to go digital and maximize the value of their acquired data. So as you can see from this table, even in the 2 to 3 year outlook from this particular study, the short to midterm digital leap for each phase is predicted. And you can see that AI is further away from some phases than others. But you can see that all phases in the 2 to 3 year cycle, getting to the digital to physical is outside of that range. So what is changing in the industry related to digitalization that may allow us to get on this path, or to even accelerate this path to get past this through the digital stage and into the digital to physical? Well, as we all know, things are rapidly changing, and advances in falling cost in data acquisition technologies, data management, data analytics are driving the value of acquired data. Improved ease of data transmission and ever-widening connectivity of devices is having a major impact. And the greenhouse gas emission reduction piece is an unavoidable requirement for all offshore energy fields. And another piece that I think is extremely important to recognize is removing human performance factors through digitalization. I've heard commentary over the years related to safety and continuing safety improvement, that there's a concern that a level of that path is plateauing. But it is my belief that digitalization will break through that plateau and continue to improve safety. For those of you who don't know, human performance factors are, of course, stress, time, pressures, distractions, personal abilities, lack of direction are some common human performance factors that can play a huge role at safety, that can be replaced or digitized to improve that journey. The energy industry, of course, is now embracing the need and value in employing digital technologies. And now there's also an expectation from the market and shareholders to be operating not only safely, but with the environment in mind. Plus, oil and gas companies have shed in-house capability following the downturn and the pandemic, and are not only looking for lower POB solutions like we talked about in Beta Nord, but are looking to digitalize and use digital solutions to fill that gap. All of these factors, as we know, are rapidly changing in our worlds, and the result is the increasing need for digitalization and industries, and it's changing industry's ability to embrace digital solutions. So I wanted to provide you with a couple of specific examples that are in our world. And one is related, as I said before, to digital asset integrity management, or subsea digital twinning, as I called it. So first, I think it's important to recognize, where's the subsea asset integrity management business today? So asset integrity management is often performed by the team who are responsible for operations, and production always takes priority, of course. Currently in the industry, subsea assets are typically, and have been for some time, designed for their service life, installed, and then inspected and repaired based on regulatory code and regulatory and code requirements, or because there's an immediate need, because there's a belief that some criteria was exceeded or something may have been damaged. Thus, the asset integrity management is typically a reactive process, naturally driven by the adherence to company norms, regulator requirements, and the associated timelines. Owners are not always using the latest technologies in data acquisition and data management, and asset integrity management software is available to some extent and in various forms from the large engineering houses. But our view is that a lot of those provisions are sometimes of poor quality and are not particularly current in terms of the latest technology. An asset life extension is often only thought about in the last quartile of an asset's life, at which point the owner scrambles to find what sometimes can be a challenging life extension solution, rather than monitoring the life of all their assets through the life cycle of the asset. So what is the opportunity? We believe that there is an opportunity to leverage existing data and acquire new data to proactively monitor and manage subsea assets to avoid unnecessary inspection and repairs, therefore having a better understanding of your asset integrity, and also reducing the need and reliance on expensive supply vessels and IRM vessels, thus reducing emissions and improving safety, and of course will also improve efficiency, de-risk, and reduce cost. So how will this be done in terms of what we intend to provide? As I said previously, a digital twin means a lot of things to a lot of people, but what just at the highest level, it'll be more than just the 3D model. We're intending to provide a fully interactive 3D virtual model with a cloud resident database, which will realize the value of the data that you already have and may not be acquiring. And then, of course, development of the asset integrity management software, which will include anomaly creation, tracking, history, statistics available for each component, and built-in risk-based planning, scheduling of asset IRM work, and then, of course, the appropriate reporting pieces that allow reporting to government, regulatory bodies, and code. But ultimately, the addition of AI and machine learning for automated assimilation of field data, and to allow predictive analytics, which is where this will need to go to allow things like the autonomous underwater vehicle and the low POV facilities that we want in the future. So one really one very specific example would be around the flow line riser or mooring chain digital replica. So just to put it in layman's terms, to give you our thoughts, first you'd need to acquire the data to measure corrosion and motion on a dynamic asset like a riser or a mooring chain. This could be done through, for example, Kraken's subsea imagery tooling, or through sensors that can measure motion and translate to loading. But then build also a digital replica in Orcaflex to model the physical asset in real time. AI machine learning could be used to identify the cause of corrosion or issues around overloading, and then can contextualize, which I think is extremely important, the contextualization, which is where the software would determine the process that led to the corrosion, geographical location, whether it was manufacturing issues, installation loads, or in other words, not only the effect of that limiting or issue with that particular asset, but the effect that it may have on other assets is an important piece of what the software will need to do. And this will allow the owner to have a real-time understanding of the life remaining in any given asset at any given point in time. So that's the subsea digital twin project and opportunity. Another opportunity is around our digital simulation software. In general, simulation of marine shipping and logistics operations is an opportunity for the application of digital solutions and AI and machine learning. So specifically related to our local NL transshipment system, the transshipment process has really been optimized to the limit it can be without the use of enhanced computer modeling of the complete system. I mean, there's so many moving parts in a system of that type that a human intervention can only bring benefit to a certain level. There is therefore an opportunity to leverage existing data and employ machine learning and AI to develop a digital twin, which will model the complete transshipment process, including shuttle tanker transits, sea states, production storage lifts, bay and quayside and export tanker operations and NTL, and pull all of these factors into, as you can see here, a holistic digital twin to provide greater efficiency and overall bring benefits to the entire industry. So how will this be achieved? Operations would be broken down into a number of individual processes. The individual processes would be modeled and their interactions modeled. Ultimately, machine learning and AI would be applied. The digital twin requires real-time data from the shuttle tankers and forecast weather data, as well as data from the production facilities and from the quayside to ensure that the transits are optimized and accurate. The digital twin will provide all stakeholders with the confidence that the tankers can predominantly sail at optimum speeds for the majority of the time, while the risk of production curtailment is reduced. So the benefits that this brings are somewhat obvious, but it's reduction in risk of production curtailment, frankly, by de-risking the system, reduction in emissions, reduction in fuel costs, reduction in wear and tear and breakdown on the vessels, and enhanced transparency and into communication and reporting. And frankly, it allows you to use the data as a better decision-making tool. So that's another specific application. And we're just nearing the end of the presentation here now, but I wanted to just highlight two other projects and a facility in the industry that I think is important to be aware of as we all get on this digital journey. One is the Marine Institute's Follet. MI has developed a unique subsea sandbox to help clients advance and test technology in their subsea systems. The sandbox or playground is a unique opportunity for industry to trial not only AUVs, but also digital twinning solutions and software prior to implementation offshore. We think that's going to be a valuable facility to support industry in this journey. And then, of course, there's the Ocean Supercluster, and I wanted to specifically talk about the Digital Offshore Canada Use Case 2, which is to create and utilize subsea virtual sandboxes to assess feasibility of seabed resident underwater intervention drones to provide inspection, maintenance, and repair services to offshore NL subsea installations. Again, you know, I think this is an important step in developing our understanding of what the digital solutions and what we need to offer to industry to get to that, to get to where we need to go to employ and maximize the value of AI and machine learning solutions in future. So with that being said, in closing, in general terms, if I can leave you with only one message, it's to enable the use of AI and machine learning in the future. It's critical that the industry get on the path to digitalization and find that minimum viable product for the various issues that you're having to start that process as soon as practical. So that's all I had, Dwayne. So thanks to everyone for your time, and I know we're low on time, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Steve and Ron. Wow, such an informative presentation. It's really dug down deep on really taking down of what you're trying to do here. And you just, like you said, there's digitalization and digital solutions are going to be in every aspects of what we're dealing with. So while we wait for some questions to come through, I do have a couple ones that I picked up during your presentation. You know, you alluded to it, but I want to get some of maybe your thought on why is it in the production side of things we're not as far along in that digital journey as you showed in that table. You know what, you know, you might think about as production, it's the same day in, day out. It seems like it'd be automatic that the digital solution be fit that area first. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'll give you truly, Dwayne, my opinion. You know, as you know, in the exploration phase, it's extremely data driven. You know, in the very earliest phases, it's extremely data driven. So I think in a way, you've got a lot of data accessible to you that you can use to apply digital solutions very early. Whereas as you start to move through that chain, you start to go from the data side to much more the physical side. You know, you start to go through development, you start building things, you have construction, and then once you're in operations, you know, in the case of an offshore asset, you've put things underwater. So there's an aspect where once you get to the production side, for one, it can be difficult to access the data, let alone use the data that you might have to apply a digital solution. So, you know, and then there's the other aspect of once you're producing, and I'll use the example of subsea assets. They're built for 20 years, you put them underwater, and then you go out and look at them when you have to. So that doesn't really lead to the proactive use of data. That kind of leads to complying with regulations and setting up a process and plan for managing those assets, and then doing it for, you know, 10 or 20 years, frankly. So I guess to pull all that back to ground, Dwayne, you know, early exploration, it's very data driven. You've got access to that data. You know, once you get to production, it can get a little harder to access the data. And there's, I guess, processes and systems set up for managing those facilities that once they're in place, they're somewhat maintained over a period of time. And again, just my high level view.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm not seeing many questions coming through from our audience. Oh, one's coming in here now. During our previous evaluation, identifying the resources to assist the oil and gas sector drive, the digitalization transformation, the availability of the technical resources on the implementation or application of the scientific and technological solutions was seen as a challenge in the province. What are your thoughts or suggestions on where these resources will come from?
So
now, that's been a lot. If you want me to read that again, I will.
Well, I'll try to answer it in the way I heard it, and I hope I can address the question. But frankly, you know, I've spent 20 years in oil and gas myself, and you know, there's different software that we use, and there's different digital applications that we use, and it's been interesting in connecting with the tech world, because what we're doing at enaimco, we're taking people from industry, from the oil and energy industry, and we're combining them with tech people and software people. And it's interesting when you talk to the tech world and how they develop products and how they deliver products, in the way they approach it, it's not entirely complementary to how the oil industry works. So I feel like there's a barrier felt on each side. You know, on the tech side, there's a view of, you know, it's such a, the data is siloed. It's a difficult industry to get into, you know, and there's sometimes a lack of understanding of how to enter the industry. And then on the oil industry side, you know, there's sometimes a hesitation to really drive innovation on the digital side, and because of the risk and cost and value of the resource, there's sometimes a focus on doing the things that you're doing them, and then just trying to improve on that. So it almost feels like a barrier that we're trying to break down between the two industries, so one can so they can each better understand the other, but what I will say, and I think this was part of that question as well, software and technical resources are hard to come by. They're hard to find in the industry. So bringing the right people in and merging them with the energy industry expertise is really important. And it's from an oil industry perspective, we need to find a way to try to get the best software and tech for people on our problems, frankly.
I will just jump in real quick and suggest that a lot of just a little plug for TechNL folks. I mean, what's being done over at TechNL to encourage growth within the industry, I think has been fantastic, and I think we're starting to see the results from that. I was actually going to suggest maybe Dwayne is the best one to answer this question because of that. But and I mean, there's other programs going on. We're working pretty closely with some folks over to Get Coding, helping people who are looking for a transition in their careers to oil or to technology. And I think these types of initiatives are needed to encourage our young people and also people who are just looking to get into technology to make that transition in order to really sustain the demand right now. Because you're right, there is a huge demand right now in the province, and resources are a little harder to come by than they maybe once were.
Yes. Oh, yes. I guess we can go all on day on how the tech companies can step up here and be part of that supply chain. But I will leave that for another discussion. But I got a couple other questions that are quickly coming through here, and while we got a couple more minutes. One gentleman here is basically says, how do you see collaboration happening without regulations? So I guess when, are we looking for the regulator to help us in that, and to push us to collaborate on this data, or is it other way around?
No, the regulator is a big part of the journey for sure, but I feel like a lot of these innovations are often driven by industry itself. But I think it's going to be extremely important that the solutions that we're solving, the regulator is involved in, frankly. And I think some of these things that we're seeing that we're calling reactive requirements from the regulator, I think they're going to be part of the path whereby you're going to start developing solutions that you can bring to the regulator and say, hey, I know you want me to go out and do my inspection every month of this particular asset, but look at this data we're getting. We think we can go out every 3 months, or we think we can go out every 6 months. So I think the regulator is a big part of that journey, but I think it is a journey, and they'll have to see the value of some of this, some of these digital solutions to I guess change some of their approaches and requirements.
All right, perfect. I like it. Last one to end off on a little utopia here. What is the largest barrier the oil and gas industry has to overcome when implementing AI? That's a far-reaching question there.
Well, I mean, I think it comes back to kind of what I said, Ron, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, because we've said it 100 times in this presentation, but the biggest barrier is you've got to start somewhere. Like, you can't just employ AI. You may have to start with some simplistic software that just gives you statistics on the data you have, and then layer in functionality. It's going to take a change in approach to start. You got to get that foot in the door and start that approach, or you'll never be able to jump directly to AI, in my view. Ron?
Yeah, I agree with that. Finding a place to start and starting there is important. I think when you think about just moving to AI, it can be daunting. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we really believe this is going to be a disruptive technology, and is being a disruptive technology, which is going to require changes in behavior, changes in processes, and humans are not great with change when you think about it. It's not our strong suit. So I think we have to find a place to start and work from there.
All right. I'm going to hand it over to Bev for the final words.
I just want to thank Steve and Ron for their presentation today. Very informative and very exciting work going on at enaimco. And I know Noy and TechNL are really looking forward to seeing where where the journey goes from here. And thank you to all the participants for taking time, to watch this today, and look forward to doing our next webinar in a few weeks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.